My name is 1MahealaniFinalweb. I was born and raised here in Ko'olapoko. My family all lived mainly in Kaneohe, but also He'ia and Kahalu'u. And all my life I have loved where I grew up in Ko'olapoko, especially in these places like Haiku Valley that are among the treasures that we hold dear. With regard to our cultural resources affected by H3, I was involved since 1972. And at the time I was a news editor for a community newspaper, a group of community newspapers called the Sun Press. And I was their news editor, and I read all these stories about the highway project being proposed and all the protests and the arguments over whether the highway should be built and where it should be built. And at the time I thought to myself, why are they making such a fuss? It's just a highway, it's just a road. And then as a news editor I had to read all of the copy, and as I read through the stories and I started reading environmental impact statements, and I actually ended up reading all 13 volumes of the EIS on H3. And then I read the socioeconomic impact statement on H3, and I realized that that this was my homeland, this was my aina, this is my aupo'a that I grew up in that is at risk because of the possible impacts of the highway. And among those impacts were an increase in crime, an increase in homelessness, an increase in problems with youth, an increase in health issues. There would be kupuna who would be unable to pay their taxes because the land values would increase with the development that would occur with the building of a new road. There were other social impacts, but it became for me a struggle also about the cultural impacts here in Ko'olapoko, primarily the impacts through which the road would pass. So as they started preparing the impact statements, we saw that there would be potential serious impacts on the native species. It went through a valley filled with old ancient koa trees and ohia trees and lama trees and all kinds of native plants that for so long had been barely bothered by any kind of modern impacts. As a water resource, there was also a concern about the impact of the highway upon Halawa Valley's water resources. We went to hearings everywhere, and again, not as much opposed to the freeway as we were advocating for the preservation of our Ko'olapoko resources and our community. You know, over the 30+ years that I was involved with advocating for our communities and our wahikapu and wahipana, our cultural and natural resources, I think our community and the government of Hawaii and the federal government might have benefited from this community struggle, because they learned that they had to be more responsive and to consult earlier with Native Hawaiians on projects that may affect cultural resources. And we learned that we can improve environmental and historic preservation laws, and we did. We went to the legislature and we did urge tightening up of historic preservation laws. So some of those improvements have occurred in the last 30 years. This project really connected me, not just with the things that we treasure and cherish about where we live here in Ko'olapoko, but it connected me with my own history of our people, with understanding our cultural practices, our traditions, why we need to care about these things. It connected me with many wonderful practitioners who were part of the struggle. It connected me with many people in the community who may be non-Hawaiian but love the islands and the aina and respect our cultural values as well. And it also connected me with people who disagreed, who felt the highway was needed and would bring a lot of good for the community. And some of whom I later became friends with. So it's, you know, that's a good thing that came out of this. I learned a lot. It's a long struggle. It's not pow yet till this story is told correctly from everyone's point of view. We hope we can bring closure to the mitigation plan, even though it's 30 years overdue. We said we want the true story about what happened in this. Number one, in the struggle over H3, we need to know the full story, both pro and con. You know, it's good to know the whole story. Number two, we need the true cultural story, what really was on the lands affected by the highway. Not the Bishop Museum's version, because they were restricted from what they could talk about. And when they talked about Kukui'okani being someplace else, they changed our history. They steal our history from us when they misinterpret sites. If that's in the written record, and that is in the Bishop Museum's written record, that's been accepted at the DLNR, then they have stolen our history from us. And that's something that needs to be corrected. Another mitigation is Halawa Valley was filled with important cultural and historic resources. There are many people in the community who want to malama Halawa Valley, and they should be allowed to form a hui and an aha to manage it for the state, so that the cultural resources can still be visited even though there's a highway going through the middle. You know, my few kupuna are still there, even though some of the graves have been disturbed, some of the heiau, many of the heiau are disturbed. Kupuna are still there, and they still can restore our mana if we go to these places. We want to rededicate Haiku Valley as a cultural preserve to honor the kupuna who are buried here and the cultural resources, the kapu places that are here. We want to bring the community back in for cultural and environmental education programs and other activities. And what we hope is to bring everybody together in Haiku Valley to celebrate closure.